Hi and welcome. So I want to talk in this recording about how I interpret someone having the sun in the 12th house, but it's conjunct the ascendant. So whatever house system you're using, you might come into a situation where someone has sun in the 12th house, but it's conjunct the ascendant. So the sun in the 12th house, in general, I would interpret it as sort of a more secluded placement for the sun. The sun expresses itself in a more secluded, quiet, introspective, spiritual way. The 12th house is sort of like the house of the undoing. It's the last house before we go into the first house of the conscious self. So it's where we kind of get rid of our baggage. We connect deeply to spirituality. We get rid of baggage, and we sort of like unfold, or we get rid of the baggage before we go into the first house. So if that makes sense, like symbolically, that's kind of how I think of it. The sun is a very conscious part of us. It's a very important part of us, and so having that in the 12th house, it does mean that there is, like, you could say, a conscious focus on spiritual themes, or kind of getting messages from other realms, or that Neptunian realm. Neptune rules the 12th house, so getting perhaps being very in tune with the spiritual world and actively focusing energies on that. So it can be a very spiritual person, somebody who actually practices spirituality, or is actively in tune with those 12th house signals and energies, like getting unconscious information, or maybe has a very highly active imagination, has very highly active dreams, is very involved in their own dream world. They may have very fantastical and rich dreams at night. So that's sun in the 12th house. So it is a more hidden, secluded sort of placement. I've read it that people with sun in the 12th house, they may actually physically like to hide, or just hide some part of themselves, just on a spiritual level or just on a psychological level. They're kind of more hidden away in some sense, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a lot going on. In fact, quite the opposite. It's just that they're so in tune with, like, maybe noticing things that other people don't notice, maybe other people who don't have sun in the 12th house. So they may notice just all this kind of more spiritual, psychic information that the 12th house deals with. But when you have the sun in the 12th house, and it's conjunct the ascendant, it's like it's almost in the first house. But so there is an element of, the ascendant is a much more conscious part of us. It's sort of like, or like it's a part of us that, we see the world through partly the filter of our ascendant. So where the 12th house is more unconscious and hidden and kind of the undoing, so to speak, the ascendant is a point in the first house. So it's very much like the physical body and the physical immediate way that we go about the world and how we respond to the world. So, and it's a part of us that is kind of very much tied to, like, our identity in a way. And so is the sun. And so I think having the sun in the 12th house conjunct the ascendant is indicative of someone who is in touch with those spiritual themes, but it forms a part of their more aware identity, or like it forms a big part of their conscious awareness. So it's a part that people actually see more, and maybe they're aware of it more when they have the sun in the 12th and conjunct the ascendant. So if they just have sun in the 12th house and it's not conjunct the ascendant, this person can be very secluded and very hidden away, or very in touch with spirituality in ways that maybe people are not as aware of it, or it's not like an immediate part of them. It's more mysterious, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But having it conjunct the ascendant would make it more obvious, and would also make it so the person is actually interested in creating an identity from that. So can be people who are very involved in sort of bringing the unconscious to the conscious, or like bringing light to something that is normally hidden away. So as an example, my sister has Sun in the 12th house conjunct the ascendant, and she's an artist. And so I think it's significant because, through her art, she is creating an identity. She is showing the world who she is. She's showing herself, and she's making something of herself through her art. But her art is very influenced by her more sort of unconscious, mysterious processes that maybe other people don't really understand. Like, how did she come to that idea? Or, the way artists, they can have all these fantastical ideas that seem to almost come from another realm. And maybe even she is not fully aware of like where these ideas come from, but it's like it's part of her like subconscious or her unconscious. It's like all these ideas and these fantastical ideas, and like she's drawing from something that isn't fully conscious, or that is not fully seen in people's practical reality, because the 12th house is things that are not as practical, and 6th house, the opposite house, would be more the practical house. So she's drawing from something that is more mystical, and that's what makes the art. But because it's conjunct the ascendant, it's like, the sun conjunct the ascendant on its own is very just aware. It's just very self-aware and has like high energy when it comes to wanting to make something of yourself, and not being afraid to show yourself, being very much what you see is what you get, and kind of shining star. Sun conjunct the ascendant is like the boss, the leader, shining star. And so in a way it's lessened when you have Sun in the 12th house conjunct the ascendant, but it can also just show that someone that is a shining star when it comes to the unconscious stuff. I hope I'm kind of explaining that okay. So in the case of my sister, it's, she's bringing that unconscious, spiritual, emotional, like stuff that we don't really understand in day-to-day life sometimes, and she's bringing it out and expressing herself through that, and in the process she's kind of becoming a shining star, that people kind of admire her or admire her artwork. So Sun conjunct the ascendant has a very commanding presence that people can't help but admire. And so it's like she's bringing that 12th house, subconscious, unconscious, whatever you want to call it, stuff into her art, and then people kind of she's shining through that. So she doesn't have Sun in the 1st house, so she's a bit more subdued, a bit more not as much of a boss or leader type, but she has an element of that because of the Sun being conjunct the ascendant. It's just that it's more to do with the 12th house themes. So she's almost like a shining star through her artwork, which is partly inspired by the 12th house themes. So the kind of getting inspiration from something that is kind of mysterious and unseen, and like more in the back of your head, rather than kind of more immediate 1st house themes, for example. So I hope that makes sense. I think it can be interpreted in these different ways. I mean, Sun in the 1st house is a very strong personality, very strong character, and Sun conjunct the ascendant is like that. But if it's in the 12th house, it's just that there's a more spiritual aspect to being a strong personality. It's maybe not as obvious, but you're shining yourself, you're showing yourself, and being this performer through the 12th house themes. It just makes for a very interesting dynamic. It's kind of a contradiction almost. Sun in the 12th house being so secluded, and the ascendant being so sort of like aware, and like being, it's part of us that like people can see. And so there's a contradiction there, but it makes for an interesting dynamic in somebody that, the Sun is shining in a very unconscious place. So it's shining in a different way, but it's conjunct the ascendant, so it's very obvious that this person is in touch with something that comes from another realm, maybe. And also, I would also say, it can also be someone who's very involved in an immediate way with just doing things actively when it comes to spirituality. So maybe they're very spiritual people who are actually giving off the impression, which is kind of like the ascendant, that they are spiritual. So they're giving off that impression, and people may know them as somebody who they can turn to get insights or get some kind of spiritual help. So maybe they're just involved in this kind of spiritual stuff in a way that is more obvious. But I hope that makes sense. And I did just want to share some of these thoughts on somebody having Sun in the 12th house and conjunct the ascendant. I think it's a very interesting combination, interesting dynamic. And this is just my interpretation. I'm sure there's other ways that astrologers can interpret this, but this is when I see this is kind of how I interpret it. So thank you.